Welcome to Night Whisper. Night Whisper brings you the darkest tales from the shadows. Join our community. Subscribe, leave a like, and prepare yourself for stories that will haunt your dreams. Have you ever experienced situations where you couldn't believe your eyes? Where your brain seemed unwilling to make sense of those moments? Situations so far removed from your normal life that your brain seems to short-circuit. I experienced this last summer in the forest behind my house in New Mexico, and I still can't say I've fully recovered from it. Now let's go back a bit. My name's Mark Ellison, and I live on about 40 acres outside a tiny town called Mora, which sits in the shadow of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. It's high desert country transitioning into pine forest, the kind of place where you can see for miles in one direction and barely see 20 feet in another. I work remotely as a systems analyst for a tech company out of Denver, which means I spend most of my days staring at code and occasionally venturing outside to remind myself what sunlight feels like. I bought the property about 5 years ago when I decided I was done with city life. Too many people, too much noise, too much everything. Out here, my nearest neighbor is almost 2 miles away, and that's exactly how I like it. The property backs up against Carson National Forest, which means I've got hundreds of thousands of acres of wilderness as my backyard. It's paradise for someone like me who enjoys solitude and the occasional hike. The land itself is a mix of cleared meadow near the house and thick ponderosa pine forest along the edges. I've got a small vegetable garden about 200 yards from the main house, right where the clearing meets the tree line. It's one of my favorite spots on the property. Peaceful, quiet, and far enough from the house that it feels like you're actually out in nature. That's where it all started. It was early June, one of those perfect New Mexico days where the sky is so blue it almost hurts to look at, and the air smells like pine sap and warm earth. I was out by the garden beds watering my tomatoes and peppers, enjoying the heat on my shoulders, and thinking about absolutely nothing important. You know those moments when your mind just sort of floats? That's when I heard it. At first I thought maybe my headphones had accidentally connected to something, like a podcast or video I'd left playing on my phone. But when I checked, my phone was in my pocket, screen dark. The sound was coming from the forest, maybe 300 or 400 feet into the trees. It was human speech, or at least it was supposed to be human speech. Have you ever heard someone talk through a really bad phone connection? Where you can hear that they're forming words, that they're trying to communicate, but all that comes through is garbled noise and fragmented syllables? It was exactly like that. A stream of what should have been language but was just broken, corrupted audio. I stood there with the hose still running, water pooling around my boots, just listening to this weird sound echoing through the trees. It went on for maybe 30 seconds, this continuous babble of almost words, and then it just stopped, cut off mid-sentence, if you could even call it a sentence. I turned off the water and waited, listening hard. Nothing. Just the normal forest sounds, birds, wind in the pine needles, the distant call of a raven. Here's the thing about weird experiences. Your brain will do almost anything to rationalize them, especially when they happen in broad daylight in familiar surroundings. I literally shrugged it off. Maybe it was someone's radio, I thought. Maybe sound was carrying weird through the trees. Maybe some hikers were out there with a Bluetooth speaker having technical difficulties. I went back to watering my plants and forgot about it by dinner time. That was my first mistake. The next few weeks passed normally. I worked, I hiked, I tended my garden. The incident with the strange sound faded into the category of odd things that happen sometimes, that everyone accumulates over a lifetime. You know, unexplained noises, weird dreams, coincidences that seem meaningful but probably aren't. My buddy Joel was supposed to visit from Albuquerque in mid-July. Joel and I go way back. We met in college and bonded over our mutual love of terrible horror movies and good whiskey. He's one of those guys who's always down for an adventure, which made him the perfect person to drag along on my longer hiking trips into the national forest. About 2 weeks after the garden incident, I decided to scout out a trail on the back section of my property. I'd started cutting it the previous summer, but hadn't finished. Just a rough path that wound through the ponderosa forest toward a small ridge I wanted to summit. The trail was overgrown as hell, and I figured I'd see how far I could get before Joel arrived and we could finish it together. It was another gorgeous day, hot and clear, with that thin mountain air that makes you feel like you could hike forever. I was maybe 40 minutes into the walk, deep in my own head, when I heard it again. That sound, the garbled speech, distant but unmistakable, echoing through the trees somewhere off to my left. But this time, there was something else I noticed. The forest had gone quiet around me. Not completely silent, but muted, like someone had turned down the volume on everything except that one strange sound. And just like that, every rational explanation I'd constructed in my head collapsed. I'm not a particularly brave person. I don't do horror movie shit like investigating strange noises or checking out what made that weird sound in the basement. My survival instinct is pretty finely tuned, and it was screaming at me to get the hell out of those woods. I turned around, careful not to make any sudden movements, and walked back toward the trail entrance at what I hoped was a casual pace. You know that feeling when you're convinced something's watching you and you're trying really hard not to run because you don't want to trigger a predator's chase response? Yeah, that. By the time I got back to the house, my hands were shaking and I had sweat pouring down my back that had nothing to do with the heat. I locked the door, which I never do during the day, and spent the rest of the afternoon trying to convince myself I'd overreacted. Spoiler alert, I hadn't. When Joel called that night to confirm his visit, I told him about the sound. His response was predictable, Joel. "Dude, it's probably just some weird acoustic thing with the wind," he said. "Or maybe a drone or something." At 1 in the afternoon in the middle of nowhere? People fly drones everywhere now, man. Or maybe it's kids from town messing around in the forest. Joel, the nearest town is 12 miles away and has a population of 600 people. What kids? He laughed. "You're overthinking this. We'll check it out when I come up. It'll be fun." Except Joel bailed on me 3 days before he was supposed to visit. His mom got sick, nothing serious, but enough that he needed to stay in Albuquerque and help her out. Which meant if I wanted to investigate the source of that sound, I'd be doing it alone. I spent 2 days trying to talk myself out of it. This is stupid, I thought. You're going to walk into the woods looking for some probably harmless thing and psych yourself out for no reason. But here's what I couldn't shake. The forest going quiet. That wasn't my imagination. That wasn't a psychological response to hearing something weird. The birds and insects had actually stopped making noise, which meant they'd sensed something. And if the wildlife was reacting to it, then it was real. Real, and probably dangerous. On July 18th, I found myself standing at the trailhead behind my house with a day pack, bear spray, and a brand new Bowie knife I'd ordered off Amazon and had zero idea how to actually use. The knife made me feel better anyway, like I had some measure of control over the situation. "If I die," I texted Joel that morning, "I'm haunting your apartment first." His response, "Cool. Can you fix my Wi-Fi while you're there?" I stared down the trail, just a thin line of disturbed earth and compressed vegetation winding into the ponderosa forest, and took a deep breath. It's just a sound, I told myself, just a weird sound. You're going to find the source, figure out what it is, and feel really stupid for being scared. I started walking. The first hour was uneventful, beautiful even. The forest was alive with bird calls and the whisper of wind through pine needles. Sunlight filtered down through the canopy in golden shafts, and the air smelled incredible. That perfect combination of warm pine resin and dry earth that you only get in high desert mountains. I was actually starting to relax when I heard it. The sound was closer this time, maybe 100 yards ahead and just off the trail to the right. Same garbled quality, same sense of broken speech trying to form coherent words. But the forest wasn't quiet this time. Everything around me was moving and rustling normally, which somehow made the whole thing weirder. I put my hand on the Bowie knife and kept walking. As I got closer, something became clear. The sound wasn't moving. It was stationary, emanating from a fixed point, which ruled out animals or people, and made me think Joel might have been right about the drone theory. When I was maybe 20 feet away, I could finally see the source. It was a speaker. A small, black, weatherproof speaker attached to a tree about 10 feet off the ground, angled downward toward the trail. On the side, in white paint, were the words, Northern New Mexico College, Forestry Department. I actually laughed out loud. A speaker, a college project, or research equipment, or some art installation. That's all it was. The relief was so intense, I felt dizzy. I stood there for a few minutes listening to the garbled speech loop. It sounded like it might have been poetry once, before whatever connection issue had corrupted the audio. Then I headed back home, feeling simultaneously vindicated and slightly embarrassed about how scared I'd been. That night, during a slow moment at work, I called the forestry department at Northern New Mexico College. The woman who answered transferred me around a few times before I ended up talking to someone named Dr. Linda Crowell, who apparently ran the department. She sounded friendly, but harried, like I'd caught her in the middle of 17 other things. "Oh God, the audio forest project," she said, when I explained what I'd found. "Yeah, that was discontinued 2 years ago." "What was it?" "Student art project. They put speakers throughout the forest, like 8 or 9 of them, and recorded poetry to be played on a loop. It was supposed to be this whole nature and words thing. Solar-powered, supposed to run indefinitely." "What happened?" She sighed. "The Navajo Nation representatives requested we take them down. Their land borders the national forest in that area, and they said the speakers were, well, they weren't thrilled about them. We tried to explain it was art, but the college vice president decided it wasn't worth souring relations over. We sent people to remove them all about 18 months ago." "Looks like you missed one." "Wouldn't surprise me. The connections were always going bad anyway. The whole project was kind of a disaster." I thanked her and hung up, satisfied that I'd solved the mystery. The rest of the summer passed without incident. I finished the trail with Joel when he finally made it up in August, and we had a great time hiking and drinking whiskey and talking shit like we always did. By the time October rolled around and the first snow fell, I'd completely forgotten about the speaker in the woods. Winter in northern New Mexico is a special kind of quiet. The first heavy snow usually hits in late November, and by January, the whole landscape is locked under 3 feet of powder. I love it. The isolation gets even more complete, and there's something deeply peaceful about being snowed in with nowhere to go and nothing to do but work and read and watch the pine branches bend under the weight of ice. The snow finally started melting in late April. By early May, the trails were passable again, and I was itching to get back out into the forest. I'd been cooped up all winter, and my body was craving the kind of deep physical exhaustion you only get from a long hike with a heavy pack. I decided to do an overnight camping trip on the trail where I'd found the speaker. I'd never made it past my usual turnaround point, a nice flat area about 3 hours in. That seemed perfect for a campsite. My plan was to set up camp there, then explore some of the offshoot trails in the afternoon before settling in for the night. It was May 7th. I remember the date because it was my birthday, and I'd taken the day off work to celebrate by being completely alone in the woods. It probably sounds sad to some people, but for me, it was perfect. The hike in was gorgeous. The forest was exploding with new growth, wildflowers blooming between the pine trees, new green needles bright against the darker old growth. Birds everywhere. The trail was in good shape, cleared of most of the winter deadfall. I almost missed the speaker when I passed it. It was completely silent now, the solar panel probably damaged over the winter, or the connections finally giving out completely. I stopped to look at it anyway, curious if I could see what had gone wrong, but everything was sealed up tight in waterproof housing. I kept moving. By early afternoon, I'd reached my planned campsite and set everything up: tent, sleeping bag, camp stove. I made myself some instant coffee and sat on a fallen log, enjoying the warmth of the sun and the sounds of the forest. It was maybe 3 o'clock and I was restless. Lots of daylight left. There was a smaller trail that split off from my main path, heading upward toward what I thought might be a ridge with a decent view. I'd never explored it before. Perfect opportunity. I grabbed my day pack with some water and snacks and started up the offshoot trail. It was steeper than the main path, winding through thick stands of ponderosa and Douglas fir. Beautiful, peaceful, the kind of place that makes you feel like you're the only person on earth. I was maybe 20 minutes into the walk, mind drifting, when I heard it again. That sound. But it was different this time. Clearer, higher quality. The garbled speech was gone. I could actually make out words now. A woman's voice, reading poetry. Calm and measured and completely incongruous with the wilderness setting. I followed the sound off the trail, pushing through some low brush until I found the source. Another speaker, mounted on a tree, just like the first one. Northern New Mexico College, same white paint. This one still worked, apparently. The audio was crystal clear. I sat down on a nearby boulder and pulled out my water bottle, taking a break and listening to the poetry. It was actually kind of nice. Something about mountains and time and impermanence, the kind of pseudo-profound stuff college students love. I was just about to pack up and head back when I heard the other voice. Someone nearby was making sounds. Weird sounds. Babbling, nonsensical syllables with this strange warbling quality to them. Like the natural rise and fall of a human voice asking questions, but in all the wrong places. Random words turned into queries. Emphasis on bizarre syllables. It would have been funny if I wasn't alone in the middle of the forest, miles from help. The sound came from somewhere in the thick brush ahead of me, maybe 30 feet away. And as soon as it started, the forest went dead silent. Every bird stopped singing. Every insect stopped buzzing. Even the wind seemed to die. Just me and this ridiculous babbling voice moving through the brush. "What the hell?" I whispered. And then I saw it. Just a glimpse, a flash of something pale pushing through the branches. An elongated shape. Thin. Wrong. A hand. Some kind of grotesque, too long hand reaching through the vegetation, attached to something I couldn't fully see. My conscious brain shut down completely. Pure animal instinct took over, and I was running before I even realized I'd stood up. I crashed back through the brush toward the trail, branches whipping my face, pack bouncing against my back. Got to the path and just kept going, feet pounding downhill, lungs screaming. Behind me, echoing through the trees. What the hell? What the hell? What the hell? It was mimicking me. The thing in the woods was mimicking my voice, testing out the phrase like it was learning to speak for the first time. I ran harder. The next 20 minutes are a blur of sheer terror and physical exertion. I barely remember the actual running, just flashes of pine trees whipping past, the sound of my own breathing, the primal fear driving every step. I made it back to my campsite and skidded to a stop at the edge of the clearing, hand hovering over the knife on my belt. My tent sat in the shade, flap partially open like I'd left it. It would take 10 minutes to pack everything up. I stood there for exactly 2 seconds, doing the mental calculus. Nope. I left it all. Tent, sleeping bag, camp stove, everything, and started back down the main trail toward home at a sustainable jog. About 30 seconds later, I stopped running. Because I heard something new. Or rather, I heard nothing. A silence so deep and complete that it felt like being underwater. Like having a glass jar dropped over your head, cutting you off from the entire world. 1 second, there was the rich soundscape of the forest, Birds calling, wind moving through branches, insects humming. And the next, there was nothing. Absolutely nothing. I froze mid-stride, one foot still raised, my whole body locked in place. The air was hot and still against my sweaty skin, suffocating, like standing in a summer attic with no ventilation. And I had the strangest feeling. Not the usual sense of being watched. This was different. This was the feeling of being examined, studied. Something was looking at me, really looking at me, trying to figure out what I was. My gut screamed at me, don't move, don't even breathe. Do what the birds are doing, what the insects are doing. Be still, blend in. This isn't something you can run from. So I stood there like a statue, mid-stride, mid-breath, not even blinking. Every muscle locked, lungs screaming for air, heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might crack bone. 10 seconds passed, 20. My vision started to narrow from lack of oxygen. Whatever was examining me, this presence, this force, it was patient, thorough, taking its time to decide if I was real or just another part of the scenery. And then, suddenly, its attention shifted. The pressure released, the focus moved elsewhere. Far off in the distance, I heard a rustle of leaves. And then, like a wave moving through the forest, sound returned. The collective exhale of 1,000 living things resuming their normal patterns. I bent forward, hands on my knees, and gasped for air. The rest of the hike back to my property was barely controlled panic. Every snapping twig made me jump. Every shadow between the trees looked like something moving. But I forced myself to maintain a steady pace because the logical part of my brain, the part that wasn't screaming in terror, knew I couldn't sprint for 2 hours straight. It was getting dark by the time I finally emerged from the tree line behind my house. I went inside, locked every door and window, and sat on my couch shaking for the next 3 hours. I didn't sleep that night, or the next 2 nights. By the third day, I was exhausted and desperate for answers. I started researching, local news first. I searched for anything unusual in Carson National Forest, disappearances, strange sightings, unexplained deaths. Found a few standard missing hiker cases from years ago, but nothing recent. Nothing that matched what I'd experienced. Then I expanded my search to folklore, Native American legends from the region, skinwalker stories, which I knew were Navajo but figured might be relevant, Wendigo myths, though those were more northern tribes, everything I could find about creatures that mimicked human speech or took on human form. That's when I found a reference to something called the Yi-Naldlushi, which is actually the Navajo word for skinwalker. But in the academic paper I was reading, there was a footnote about a different concept, a lesser-known belief, the Atsa-na-shi. The term loosely translated to echo walkers, or those who copy. According to the paper, written by an anthropology student from New Mexico State, these were entities that existed in the deepest parts of the forest, attached to sound and movement. They would encounter living things and attempt to copy them, to become them. But the copying process was imperfect, distorted. The paper mentioned that Navajo communities near Carson National Forest had reported encounters with deer that weren't quite right. Animals with twisted limbs or malformed features moving in unnatural ways. Dogs that looked almost correct but had something wrong with their eyes or the way they walked. And occasionally, rarely, something that looked almost human. I sat back from my computer screen, heart pounding. The speakers. Jesus Christ, the speakers. Dr. Crowell had said the Navajo representatives wanted them removed, not because they were offended by the art project, because they knew what the speakers might attract. My hands were shaking as I pulled up the college directory and found her number. It was almost 9 at night, but I called anyway. Hello? She sounded confused, probably checking the caller ID and not recognizing the number. Dr. Crowell, this is Mark Ellison. I called a few months ago about the speaker I found in the forest. Oh yes. Did you find another one? No. I need to know who I can talk to. Someone from the Navajo Nation who was involved in getting those speakers removed. It's important. There was a long pause. May I ask why? I saw something in the woods, something that was copying sounds, speech. I think it might be related to why they wanted the speakers taken down. Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice was different, careful. There was a young man, grandson of one of the spiritual leaders. He acted as a liaison between the college and the nation. His name is Thomas Begay. He's the one who pushed hardest for removal. Can you give me his contact information? I'm not supposed to give out personal information, but she trailed off. Let me call him first. See if he's willing to talk to you. If he is, I'll have him reach out. That work? Yes, thank you. Mr. Ellison, be careful out there. She hung up. Thomas Begay called me the next morning at 7 a.m. I'd finally fallen asleep around 4, so I was groggy and disoriented when the phone rang. Mark Ellison? The voice was young, male, with just a trace of a southwestern accent. Speaking. This is Thomas Begay. Dr. Crowell said you saw something in the forest, an Atsa Nashi. The way he said it, so matter-of-fact, like we were discussing the weather, jolted me fully awake. You know what they are? Yes. Can you meet today? There's a coffee shop in Mora, the Dancing Moon. I can be there in an hour. See you then. The Dancing Moon was exactly the kind of place you'd expect in a tiny New Mexico town. Exposed adobe walls, local art for sale on every surface, and the smell of roasting coffee beans so strong it almost knocked you over when you walked in. There were maybe 4 other people in the whole place, spread out at different tables with laptops and books. Thomas Begay was sitting in the back corner. I recognized him immediately, though I'm not sure how. Something about the way he carried himself, maybe. He looked young, probably mid-20s, with long dark hair pulled back in a braid and sharp, intelligent eyes that tracked me as I approached. Mr. Ellison, he said, standing to shake my hand. His grip was firm. Call me Mark, and thank you for meeting with me. We sat down. He already had a coffee in front of him, some complicated-looking thing with foam art on top. I ordered a plain black coffee from the waitress and waited for him to speak first. Dr. Crowell said you saw one, he said. An Atsa Nashi. I don't know what I saw. I heard something first, something copying my voice, saying, "What the hell," over and over. And I saw a hand, I think, something that wasn't quite right. He nodded slowly, like this confirmed something he'd already suspected. Start from the beginning. Tell me everything. So I did. The whole story. Finding the first speaker, the call to Dr. Crowell, the camping trip, the second speaker, the thing in the woods, the terrible silence and the feeling of being examined. He listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious as I talked. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, fingers wrapped around his coffee cup. You're lucky, he finally said. Lucky? That it didn't get a better look at you, that you didn't move when it was watching. What was it? He leaned back in his chair. I don't know how well I can explain this. I don't think about them the same way my grandfather does. Try me. He smiled slightly at that. Okay. You know how all living things on Earth share some DNA? How if you go back far enough in the evolutionary tree, we all have a common ancestor? Even really different organisms, humans and bacteria, humans and plants? I nodded. I think Atsa Nashi are in that family tree somewhere. But I think they branched off from something else, something that's not part of our normal evolutionary path. That's a hell of a theory. My grandfather would say they're bad spirits that spawn deep in the old forests, attached to signs of life, sound, movement, heat. When they find something alive, they try to copy it. But they have to disassemble it first in a way, study it, learn how it works. And then? Then they try to find more of the same thing, to make a better copy. Most of the time, they're harmless. They copy deer or coyotes or birds, and you might see something that looks a little off moving through the woods, but it's not dangerous, just wrong. But sometimes they copy humans. His face darkened. Yes. Has that happened before? He was quiet for a moment, then seemed to come to a decision. About 6 years ago, I saw one. An Atsanashi that had copied a deer. I was out in the forest on my ATV, going way too fast through some sparse trees, stupid kid stuff. And I saw this animal lying on the ground in the distance. He took a sip of his coffee, eyes distant with the memory. I cut the engine and rolled to a stop maybe 20 feet from it. Thought it was hurt. Its back legs weren't working, and it was pulling itself forward with its front legs. I reached for my knife, thinking I'd need to put it down. And the second my hand moved toward my belt, this thing's head just snapped toward me. Snapped? Not like it heard a sound and looked around. It immediately turned its head exactly toward me, like it knew precisely where I was. And its face. He shuddered. It was like someone had tried to make a deer, but didn't have all the right parts. Everything was twisted, elongated. The eyes were swollen and wrong, and it just stared at me. And I got this overwhelming feeling that it was trying to figure me out, trying to understand what I was. What did you do? After a few seconds, it turned and dragged itself away into the brush. I pushed my ATV as fast as it would go back home and told my grandfather what I'd seen. That's when he explained about the Atsa Nashi, about what they are and what they do. And the speakers? Thomas's expression hardened. When my grandfather found out about the college's project, speakers broadcasting sound deep in the forest, day after day, month after month, he knew what would happen. Sound attracts them. It gives them something to study, something to copy, and the sound of human speech. He shook his head. He tried to explain it to the college administration, but they thought he was crazy. Some old superstitious Indian worried about noise pollution or disturbing sacred land or whatever. But they eventually took them down. Only after I got involved. I have a degree from UNM. I can code switch, speak their language. I made it about respecting indigenous perspectives and maintaining good relations with the nation, academic language they could understand. But even then, most of them thought it was bullshit. Dr. Crowell said they discontinued the project 18 months ago. They did. They sent people out to remove all the speakers. He leaned forward. But they missed at least 2. The one you found back in June and the one that was still working in May. And in that time, something learned to copy human speech. Yes. We sat in silence for a moment. The coffee shop felt too bright, too normal. Like we were discussing something that couldn't possibly exist in the same world as foam art and indie rock playing softly through overhead speakers. What do I do? I finally asked. Stay out of the forest. That's it? What else can you do? You can't kill it. You can't capture it. The only way to stop one is... He cut himself off. Is what? He was quiet for a long time, conflict clear on his face. Finally, the only way to kill an Atsanashi is to make it copy something that's already dying. My grandfather's words, not mine. They complete the copying process and take on all the characteristics of what they're copying, including death. But that means you need bait, I finished. Living bait that's going to die. He nodded, looking miserable. Has your grandfather ever? Twice that I know of. Once with a deer that had been hit by a car and was suffering. They brought it to the Atsanashi they'd been tracking. And once... He stopped. Once what? A dog. Someone's dog that had gotten attacked by a mountain lion and was dying anyway. They used it to kill an Atsanashi that had been getting too close to the community, taking on shapes that were getting too close to human. Jesus Christ. Is there one near your community now? Near the nation? I don't think so. The speakers were on public land, near your property. If something learned to copy human sounds out there, it's your problem now, not ours. The bluntness of that statement stung, but I understood it. This wasn't their mess. The college had created this situation despite their warnings. So I just abandoned my property, my home? I don't know, man. I'm telling you what I know, what I believe. What you do with that information is up to you. He stood up, fishing some cash out of his wallet and dropping it on the table. I have to go, but if you see it again, the Atsanashi, don't try to fight it. Don't try to communicate with it. Just run and hope it doesn't decide to follow you. Thomas, wait, is there anything else I should know? He paused, hand on the back of his chair. Yeah, one thing. My grandfather says they're most dangerous when they're almost finished copying, when they're nearly perfect, because that's when they start looking for more of what they've copied, when they start hunting. Hunting for what? For whatever they've learned to be. If it's copied a deer, it looks for other deer. If it's copied a human, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I watched him leave the coffee shop, then sat there alone with my cold coffee, trying to process everything I'd just learned. An entity that copied living things. That was drawn to sound. That had spent months, maybe years, listening to recorded human speech through those speakers, learning to mimic it, learning to become it. And now, it was out there in the forest behind my house, nearly complete in its copying, starting to hunt for more humans to study, to disassemble, to replace. I pulled out my phone and called Joel. Dude, it's like 8:30 on a Saturday morning, he answered groggily. I need you to come up here, today, right now. What? Why? I can't explain over the phone. Please, Joel, I need help with something. There was a pause. Joel might give me shit about a lot of things, but he knew when I was serious. Okay, give me a couple hours to get my stuff together. I'll text you when I'm on the road. Thank you. You okay, man? No, I said honestly, but I will be. Just get here. I hung up and stared at my phone, mind racing. An Atsanashi that had copied human form. Nearly perfect now, probably. Hunting in the forest, looking for people to study, to complete its transformation. And the only way to kill it was to make it copy something dying. The implications of that settled over me like a lead blanket. Joel arrived just after noon, pulling his beat-up Subaru into my driveway and emerging with a duffel bag and a concerned expression. I'd spent the morning sitting on my porch with a rifle across my lap, a .308 hunting rifle I'd bought years ago and barely used, watching the tree line. Okay, he said, dropping his bag and looking at me with genuine worry. What the fuck is going on? You look like you haven't slept in a week. 4 days, actually. Mark, seriously, you're scaring me. I told him everything, the whole story, from the first speaker to my conversation with Thomas Begay that morning. He listened without interrupting, his expression cycling through disbelief, concern, and finally a kind of careful neutrality that told me he was trying very hard not to say what he was thinking. When I finished, he sat down on the porch steps and rubbed his face with both hands. So let me get this straight, he finally said. You think there's some kind of shape-shifting monster in the woods that learned to be human by listening to poetry speakers? That's the simplified version, yeah. And you learned this from a Navajo guy who says his grandfather is a shaman. Thomas has a degree in anthropology from UNM. He's not some random person spouting superstition, but his grandfather is a shaman. Joel, I'm not saying you're crazy, he said quickly. I'm saying you've been out here alone for too long and you saw something that scared you and your brain is trying to make sense of it by latching onto a convenient explanation that fits the fear. I know what I heard, what I saw. You saw a hand for like half a second while you were already freaking out about weird sounds. And the silence thing, that's a documented psychological phenomenon. When you're afraid, your brain can literally shut out sensory information. Make you think everything went quiet when really you just stopped processing. The forest stopped, Joel. Every bird, every insect. That wasn't in my head. He looked at me for a long moment, then sighed. Okay, let's say I believe you. What do you want me to do? Help you hunt this thing? No, I want you to help me set up cameras. Game cameras all along the tree line, and a couple on the trails. If there's something out there, if it comes close to the house, I want footage of it. And then what? Then I'll have proof, and then I can figure out what to do next. He didn't look convinced, but he nodded. All right, we can do that. But Mark, if we don't find anything, if these cameras show nothing but deer and squirrels for the next few weeks, you need to talk to someone, like a therapist. Deal? Deal. We spent the rest of the afternoon setting up cameras. I'd ordered 8 of them online that morning with expedited shipping, and they'd arrived just before Joel did. We placed them strategically, 4 along the tree line behind my house, 2 on the main trail at different distances, and 2 on the offshoot trail where I'd seen the hand. The whole time we were in the forest, I was on high alert, listening for any change in the ambient sound, watching for movement in the underbrush. Joel noticed and kept trying to keep things light, making jokes and talking about normal things, but I could tell he was nervous too. Maybe he didn't fully believe me, but he believed I believed it. And that was something. By the time we finished, it was getting dark. We went back to the house, and I made dinner while Joel set up his stuff in the guest room. We spent the evening drinking beer and watching a movie, pretending everything was normal. Joel left the next morning, making me promise to call him when the cameras captured something. Anything, he said, even if it's just a really weird-looking squirrel. I will. And Mark? Seriously, man, if you need to get out of here for a while, you can crash at my place. My couch is uncomfortable as hell, but it's yours. Thanks. I'm okay, though. He didn't look like he believed me, but he got in his car and left anyway. The next week was torture. I checked the cameras obsessively, pulling the SD cards every morning and reviewing the footage. Lots of deer. A black bear once, which was cool. Raccoons. A mountain lion at 3 a.m. that made my heart race, even though I was watching it on my computer screen in broad daylight, but nothing unusual. Nothing that looked wrong or moved in strange ways. I started to think Joel might be right. Maybe I'd psyched myself out over nothing. Maybe the hand I'd seen was just a branch or a trick of the light. Maybe the silence was psychological. Maybe I was losing it. But then, on day 8, one of the trail cameras caught something. It was footage from the early morning, around 5 a.m. when it was just barely getting light. The camera was motion activated, and something had triggered it about 100 yards down the trail. At first I couldn't tell what I was looking at. The image was grainy in the low light, and the subject was at the far edge of the camera's range. But there was definitely something there. Something moving. I slowed the playback down, squinting at the screen. It was tall, very tall, and thin, abnormally thin, like its limbs were stretched out. It moved through the frame in a weird, stuttering way, like stop-motion animation, like it was learning how to walk. The footage lasted maybe 8 seconds before the subject moved out of frame. I replayed it a dozen times, trying to get a better look, but the resolution wasn't good enough. It was just a tall, thin shape moving wrong. I checked the timestamp, 5:47 a.m., 3 days ago. I went through all the other cameras' footage from that morning. Nothing. Whatever it was, it had only appeared on that one camera, and only for those 8 seconds. I called Thomas Begay. Mark, what's wrong? I got something on camera. I think it's the Atsanashi. Silence on the other end. Then, can you send me the footage? Yeah, give me your email. I sent him the clip and waited, phone pressed to my ear, listening to his breathing change as he watched it. Fuck, he finally said. Is that what I think it is? I need to show this to my grandfather. Can I call you back in an hour? Yes, please. The next hour was the longest of my life. I sat at my computer, replaying the footage over and over, trying to see more detail, trying to convince myself it was just a person or a weird-looking deer or anything normal. But I couldn't. because normal things don't move like that. Normal things don't have proportions like that. When Thomas called back, his voice was tight. My grandfather wants to meet with you. Today, if possible. Where? There's a place on the nation, near the forest border. I'll text you coordinates. Can you be there at sunset? Yes. Come alone. And Mark, bring the rifle I saw in your Facebook photos, the hunting rifle. My blood ran cold. Why? Just bring it. He hung up. I drove to the coordinates Thomas sent, a dirt road that led to a small clearing on the edge of Navajo Nation land. The sun was just starting to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. There were several vehicles parked in the clearing when I arrived. Thomas stood near a beat-up Ford truck, talking to an older man I assumed was his grandfather. There were others too, maybe a dozen people total, mostly men, all Navajo, all looking grim and determined. I got out of my truck, the rifle case in my hand, and approached slowly. Thomas's grandfather was shorter than I expected, probably in his late 60s, with long gray hair and a face carved from weathered leather. He wore traditional clothing, turquoise and silver, woven fabrics, and there was a kind of presence about him that commanded respect. He looked at me for a long moment, dark eyes assessing, then spoke in Navajo. Thomas translated. He says you've seen the Echo Walker, the one that copies men. Yes. More Navajo, more translation. He says it's nearly complete. Soon it will be perfect, and then it will come looking for more. It will come to your house, to the town. It will study people and copy them and replace them. Can we kill it? The old man smiled slightly at that. Not a happy smile, but one that acknowledged my directness. He spoke again. He says yes, but the price is high. What price? Thomas hesitated before translating the response. The price is bait. The price is sacrifice. Someone has to die for the Echo Walker to die. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. You mean? He means someone has to offer themselves. Someone dying, yes, but someone who goes willingly. The old man spoke again, more urgently this time. Thomas's face went pale as he listened. What? I demanded. What's he saying? He says he'll do it. He's old. He's sick. Lung cancer stage 4. He has maybe 3 months left, probably less. He'll offer himself to the Echo Walker. No, I said immediately. No, we'll find another way. But the old man cut me off with a sharp gesture and a stream of rapid Navajo. Thomas translated quietly. He says there is no other way. He says this is his fault. He should have fought harder to get the speakers removed years ago. He should have made them understand. Now a monster walks in human shape because he failed, and he will fix his failure. This is his choice. His honor. I looked around at the other people gathered in the clearing. Some of the women were crying silently. The men stood with rigid shoulders and tight jaws. Thomas, I said desperately, there has to be another option. We can't just... This is our way, Thomas said quietly. You asked what to do about the Atsa-Nashi. This is what we do. This is what we've always done. The old man spoke again, gentler this time. Thomas almost smiled as he translated. He says, don't waste time arguing. The sun is setting, and we have work to do. He asks if you'll help us. I looked at this man, this stranger, who was offering to die to kill a monster that my people had accidentally created, and I felt something break inside my chest. Yes, I whispered. I'll help. The plan was simple in concept, horrifying in execution. We would go to the place where I'd seen the Atsa-Nashi, the trail with the still functioning speaker. We would bring the old man, Thomas's grandfather, whose name I learned was Daniel Largo. He would stand near the speaker, making himself visible, making himself available for study. And when the Atsa-Nashi came to examine him, to begin copying this new subject, Daniel would take his own life. The Echo Walker would complete its copying process, taking on all of Daniel's characteristics, including his imminent death from cancer. And that would be the end of both of them. It was the most horrific thing I'd ever heard. "How long will it take?" I asked Thomas as we drove in convoy toward my property. After it happens, how long until the Atsanashi dies? My grandfather says hours, maybe a day. It depends on how completely it's copied him. And you're sure this will work? Thomas was quiet for a moment. I'm not sure of anything, but my grandfather is, and I trust him. We parked at my house and gathered our supplies. The plan was to hike in during the last hour of daylight, position ourselves around the speaker location, and wait. Daniel would stand in the open. The rest of us would hide, rifles ready in case something went wrong. I still didn't know what that meant, what something going wrong would look like in this already nightmare scenario. Daniel himself seemed completely calm. He'd changed into ceremonial clothing, buckskin and feathers, intricate beadwork, war paint on his face. He carried a stone knife on his belt, the blade polished and wickedly sharp. This was the knife he would use. The knife he would use on himself. We started down the trail just as the sun touched the horizon. There were 8 of us total, me, Thomas, Daniel, and 5 other men from the nation whose names I never learned. Everyone except Daniel carried a rifle. The forest was alive with evening sounds as we walked. Birds calling their final songs before roosting, insects beginning their night chorus, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, normal sounds, living sounds. I wondered if we'd hear them go quiet. It took us about 40 minutes to reach the location of the second speaker. In the fading light, I could see it mounted on its tree, still softly playing its loop of poetry. The woman's voice reading, calm and measured, completely oblivious to what was about to happen beneath it. Thomas positioned everyone strategically. 2 men on elevated positions with good sight lines. 2 more in the brush on opposite sides of the clearing. Thomas and I would be closest, hidden behind a fallen log about 30 feet from where Daniel would stand. Daniel himself walked to the center of the clearing, directly beneath the speaker. He stood there for a moment, face tilted up toward the canopy, listening to the poetry. Then he began to sing. It was a Navajo song. I didn't understand the words, but the melody was haunting and beautiful. It echoed through the darkening forest, twining with the recorded voice above him. 2 human voices in the woods. Perfect bait. We waited. The sun set completely. The forest transitioned into that strange twilight period where everything is shadows and uncertain shapes. Daniel kept singing, his voice strong and clear despite his age and illness. Half an hour passed, then an hour. My legs were cramping from crouching behind the log. Mosquitoes were feasting on every exposed bit of skin. I was starting to think maybe it wouldn't come. Maybe we'd guessed wrong about where it was or what would attract it. And then the forest went silent. It happened exactly like before, like a switch being flipped, like a jar dropping over the whole world. Every bird, every insect, every rustling leaf just stopped. Daniel stopped singing too. He stood very still in the clearing, hands at his sides, waiting. I could hear my own heartbeat. Nothing else. Then, from the darkness beyond the clearing, came a sound. Singing. A man's voice, singing the same Navajo song Daniel had been singing. But it was wrong. The pitch was off, the rhythm stuttering, like a recording played at the wrong speed. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Something moved in the trees. Something tall. It emerged into the clearing slowly, and even in the near-total darkness, I could see it was wrong. So wrong. It had the general shape of a man. 2 arms, 2 legs, a torso, and head. But the proportions were distorted. The arms too long, the legs bent at odd angles, the head tilted at a degree that would break a human neck. And it was still learning to walk. Each step was deliberate, experimental, like it was figuring out how joints worked. It saw Daniel and stopped. Standing maybe 20 feet from him, they looked at each other. The Atsunashi tilted its head further, studying Daniel. I couldn't see its face clearly in the darkness, and part of me was grateful for that. It spoke. "Why are you here?" Daniel's voice, asking Daniel's question back to him, testing out the words. Daniel responded in Navajo. I didn't understand the words, but his tone was gentle, sad, like he was saying goodbye. The Atsunashi mimicked his response, the Navajo syllables slightly more correct this time. And then Daniel reached for the knife at his belt. The Atsunashi watched, curious. Daniel brought the blade to his throat. "No," Thomas whispered beside me, and I realized this was the moment he hadn't fully believed would come. The moment his grandfather would actually do this. I put my hand on Thomas's arm, holding him in place. Daniel spoke one last phrase in Navajo. I'd learn later it meant, "for my people," and drew the blade across his own throat. The sound of his body falling was the loudest thing I'd ever heard in that silent forest. The Atsunashi stood perfectly still, watching Daniel bleed out on the forest floor, watching him die. And then it began to change. The transformation was subtle at first, just a slight shifting of proportions, a straightening of limbs, but it accelerated quickly. The thing in the clearing was collapsing into a more human shape, becoming shorter, the limbs adjusting to normal lengths, becoming Daniel. It took maybe 2 minutes. By the end, there were 2 identical bodies lying in the clearing, both Daniel Largo, both wearing ceremonial clothing, both with their throats cut. Except one was still moving, still breathing, still alive but dying, copying the death it had witnessed. Thomas was shaking beside me, silent tears streaming down his face. We waited another hour, watching the copy die. It was horrible, the choking sounds, the twitching, the slow fade. But we had to be sure. Finally, it went still. The forest remained silent for another few minutes. And then, like someone turning the volume back up, sound returned. An owl hooted in the distance. Insects began to buzz. The night wind rustled through pine needles. The other men emerged from their hiding spots. 2 of them went to check the bodies, confirming both were dead. The others began the process of retrieving Daniel's real body, preparing it for whatever ceremonies would follow. Thomas and I stayed behind the log, neither of us able to move yet. "I'm sorry," I finally said. "I'm so fucking sorry." "He chose this," Thomas said, voice hollow. "He wanted this. He told me last night that he was grateful, that instead of dying in a hospital bed, he got to die like a warrior, protecting his people, but His voice broke. "I didn't think he'd really do it. I thought there'd be another way." "There wasn't. I know." We helped carry Daniel's body back to my property, where more vehicles had arrived. There was a whole community there now, people who'd come to support Thomas's family, to honor Daniel's sacrifice. They took his body away in a truck, and I stood in my driveway watching the taillights disappear, feeling like I'd been hollowed out. Thomas was the last to leave. He paused at his car door and looked back at me. "The other body," he said. "The copy. We'll take care of it too. Burn it in the traditional way. Make sure nothing remains." "Thank you. And Mark, you should probably move. Get out of here. There might be more of them in those woods. The speakers were up for years before we got them taken down." The thought made my blood run cold. More? I don't know, but I wouldn't risk it. Not after this. He got in his car and left, and I was alone. I went inside, locked every door and window, and sat on my couch in the dark for hours, trying to process what I'd witnessed. An old man had died to kill a monster. A monster that existed because someone thought it would be nice to have poetry in the forest, because nobody listened to the warnings, because people like me lived out here in our isolation, never thinking about what we might be disturbing. I called Joel at 3 a.m. He answered groggily. "Mark? What's wrong?" "I need to sell the property. Can you help me find a place in Albuquerque?" He was quiet for a moment, processing. "You got something on camera, didn't you? Something real?" "Yeah." "Do you want to tell me about it?" I thought about Daniel Largo, standing calmly in a clearing as something inhuman studied him. I thought about the sound of a stone blade cutting through flesh. I thought about watching something reshape itself into human form while copying death. "No," I said. "I really don't." "Okay. I'll start looking at apartments tomorrow. You can crash here until we find something." "Thanks, Joel." "Hey, Mark, are you safe right now?" I looked at my windows, at the darkness beyond them, at the forest that stretched for hundreds of miles into the mountains. I don't know. I left 3 weeks later, sold the property at a loss to a couple from Texas who wanted to retire somewhere remote. I didn't tell them why I was selling, didn't warn them about what might be in the woods. Maybe that makes me a coward. Maybe I should have, but I just wanted out. I've been living in Albuquerque for 4 months now, small apartment close to Joel, within sight and sound of thousands of other people. It should feel suffocating after 5 years of solitude, but instead it feels safe. I don't hike anymore. I don't go into forests. I barely even go to parks. Because I know what's out there now. I know there are things in the deep woods that no one can explain. Things that copy and replace and become. Things that are drawn to sound and movement and life itself. Most people will never encounter them. Most people are lucky enough to live their whole lives without knowing these things exist. But I know. And Daniel Largo knew, and he paid the price for my people's ignorance. Thomas texted me last week. Just one message. Found evidence of 2 more. Dealt with them. Don't come back. I won't. Some places aren't meant for humans anymore. Some places belong to the things that were there first, the things that branched off from our evolutionary tree into something alien and hungry. The woods behind my old property are one of those places now. And if you ever hear garbled speech in a forest, if you ever see something that looks almost human but not quite right, if the forest ever goes completely silent around you, don't move. Don't breathe. Don't let it know you're real. And for God's sake, don't go back.